Welcome to New Book News, a series celebrating writers whose books were published during the pandemic lockdown. My name is Karen Schubert, and I'm the director of Lit Youngstown, a literary arts nonprofit in Northeast Ohio. We have programs for writers, readers, and storytellers. And next Sunday, our New Book News reading will feature Kevin Carey, Philip Metris, and Kim Roberts. I'm so pleased to welcome these writers to this evening's reading. Cindy Bosley, a longtime citizen of Toledo, is a poet, essayist, and quilt artist. She holds a poetry MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop and is the author of the Siren Sonnets. And one of her quilts appears in One Block Wonders of the World. Her new book is Quilt Life, published by Bottom Dog Press. Welcome, Cindy.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm really pleased to be here and excited about Lit Youngstown hosting this event. The first poem I wanted to open with is from my new book, Quilt Life, which is, as you said, published by Bottom Dog Press, which is an Ohio small press. And that came out last May and has been very exciting and certainly something to keep my mind and my computer occupied during the pandemic. This poem out of the book is called Churn Meditation, and it's the poem maybe most directly about quilting. Churn, if you're not familiar with quilt block names, is a traditional quilt block, and I'll show the cover just enough. It is this single square with triangles and in a particular pattern, and it does supposedly come from the actual churn used for butter and other making. So Churn Meditation. 1. At home alone in a striped bra, I browse the internet for poster-size images of the known universe. You probably know the ones, those maps of the multiple galaxies that say, you are here. You've probably watched digitally animated versions online, their titles coming up as Facebook memes dressed like scientific articles, which exponentially, with hypothetical light years, expand the situation where you are so that you are illustrated as a cosmic molecule and can finally feel your smallness, your own instantaneousness. You are a cup of noodles, carrot and pea and corn kernel, reconstitutable in under 3 minutes. I, fellow human, am a tea bag of herbs and leaves. We think we know we roam across earth as if on a piece of barley fallen loose from the measuring cup, headed to the crock pot. And we are so literally bits of nothing, empty like the gap where my key hangs on the ring. Is it any wonder then that everything ripples in packets, not waves, carried by the energy of fear and loss? 2. I've been listening to a couple meditation guys on audiobook. I am here, but only for a speckle, a pock, a grain of black pepper in a spice jar, among jars, in the spices factory. Just one black pepper fleck in the vat of pepper flecks, each of us. Mostly what I feel is the gravity of spin, the force of living, beings trapped by speed and a mean face on the merry-go-round. And I'm searching for the Milky Way poster because I think it would help pass the blink of an instant, years thickening like a churn of butter, a child grinding that handle, the churn so heavy, the butter thickening, the dash doesn't want to move, and we are here, round stick in a square hole, churning, or mortar and pestle, simple tools in the powerless, fleeting hands, if the universe has hands. And I'd have to check that map. The highway rest stop surely has one, but they say human pains pass, hurts fade. The universe, though, will expand forever. The unified field is open. Come on, let's crush each other. It'll be over in less than a moment. And then, as I was reading through my fellow poets' books, I was, of course, noting, and maybe you'll hear one later, noting from page some themes common to me in terms of parents with dementia or aging and other things. So this one is called Alzheimer's Early Onset. Yesterday, picking up an orphan t-shirt from my daughter's friend's house, I drove back and forth down the street 5 times and back again 1 more time to see if it was just springtime and tree blossoms shunting the frost behind them, their insistent explosion of green, keeping the house from looking like its winter self. The house would not jump out for me. When I called the mother, busy like me, I had the wrong street, 1 street over. And it was funny, but always the question, when does the forgetting come fully upon me? There's the note on my office computer. Class starts at 12:55, leave here at 12:47, but only if it's Tuesday or Thursday. Note to self. I have always been absent-minded, something to laugh at in midlife. In class, talking, and then the word blank comes, like digital buffering. I ask them, oh shoot, it was right here. What's the word for when you hunt for something? They wait politely. It comes to me and we laugh. Investigate, that's the word. I feel words leak out like a slow oil drip from the valves of an engine. So slow, the oil change will refill the, what's the word? The reservoir. It's okay, it's not a word I use every day, before anyone ever notices the leak. This can go on for years. Last week at a friend's house, something else. Tissues in my hand after a sneeze. I asked, do you have a throwing away place? Trash can had oozed off the mental countertop, maybe on my way there. I watch for it. I keep notations inside my very detailed planner. My private notes look more and more like Aunt Luena's in the home. Wake, bathe, meds, food. I check them off when they are complete because later I will look at those bottles on the counter and have no memory of the morning routine. Maybe that's normal. Maybe that's menopause. I ask my doctor about early onset, about testing. I do the puzzles. My brain stays plenty busy. How can it not? There is so much to remember. My father died of Alzheimer's. My doctor brushes me off, says that in 10 years, it won't even be a thing. The research is coming right along, he swears. Meanwhile, my father died of Alzheimer's and I can't remember if it's Thursday. I hated him the most of my siblings, but in the worst of it, just the worst of it, before it got really bad, during the weeks he still had a cell phone in his hand and knew that it was for calling people. It was me he called, in the middle of the night, leaving messages. Cindy, hello, are you there? He didn't remember about voicemail. He didn't even remember answering machines. Can you imagine forgetting so far back that the person who loves you least in this world is the one your muscle memory, arthritic fingers dial in the middle of the night? Think of the valve leak, oil slowly easing through a seal. For years, quiet. But now, the moment just before bursting. Think of the full, hot cup splashing just one, what's the word? Molecule onto the hand. Think about the coffee pot left on all day, overheated but still whole, until that one final instant before it cracks. Can you also feel the mind's skyward rocketing, an everyday O-ring about to give way? Thanks. This poem I chose because it was written in a sort of after a few months of like grief where a number of things were happening, and it was just one of those, what else could possibly happen? Of course, this is pre-pandemic. So this poem is called Until All the Terrible Things Have Happened. Life is a crew-cut bully hanging out leisurely behind a tree, butterfly knife open, twirling it like a baton between his fingers, t-shirt sleeves rolled up around a 1950s cellophane of cigarettes. He knows you're coming. After a few really awful things have happened, you don't want to know what else might be ahead. And after grieving another recent heartrending tragedy, when you still count all your children alive beside you, Still feel your beloved rustling a sleepy turn in the bed. Still twist on the faucet for the cat. You just want to hunker down, cancel the day's appointments, get low, greet your knees in the broad daylight, scooch under the end table beside the sofa, and quiver there. Thanks. I have 2 more poems I'll read. This one is called Mystics, and it's one I actually haven't read, I don't think, at a reading because it's longer. However, it's broken into sections, and so maybe the break of sections will help it seem like a series of short poems. Mystics. 1. There are hundreds of Catholics, disheveled but Sunday dressed, and sitting with little space between them. Some pockets are empty in the crowd, pockets of coats and pockets of absence in the pews. 1 or 2 ladies will faint before the end of Mass. It is so hot, and it is always the ladies who faint. They are overcome with Christ, I prefer to think, and images of their own interior castles. 2. The priest has some sense of his grandness, sashaying the aisle, one boy with the Bible, one boy carrying the cross. We observe as the priest's pale, bored face reenacts the theater before us. It is a minor holy day, so the incense pot is cantilevered across the vast sanctuary as if it were a head, and we think immediately of St. John the Baptist and also King Herod, but there are 15 verses referring to beheadings in the Bible. Unfortunate end, someone mutters, who is also thinking these thoughts. 3. Father, it has been 17 months since I have set foot in your holy building. I like the singing, though. 4. Some think it easy to visit a church alone. I myself have often walked to Mass, first as a girl because my mother did not go, but insisted I must, and then as a divorcee, walking down the steps from my apartment and over a few yards. Grandmother would be pleased I lived so close, but disappointed that I spent so little time there. She knew better than I did that I'd never be a nun. She told me, a child who just confessed a kindergarten crush, that the faint freckle on my ring finger meant a man would never want to marry me. My first answered prayer was that the freckle disappeared. 5. Why did my sister and I do it? Why did we strike out for Saturday confession before Easter just because our mother said so? Why did we sit one by one in the dark room with only the priest and the other shamed person on the other side of the priest, with his or her screen closed, but listening quick for every word, as of course we all did? Why didn't we take off for the grocery store, which was closer, and bother the market man and buy some brightly colored jawbreakers with our alms money? Mother forbade us to light the votives near the statue, and we obeyed that too, except for the one I lit by praying it would light. 6. To walk into a church alone now is to wear a bright coat of flame. I prefer to sneak in, completely unseen, to move like Strider in Lord of the Rings, wearing a black hood and smoking a pipe, sulking in a corner. I want a mission as grand and dangerous as Frodo's, with a wizard and a dragon, where now I have a coffee cup and a pen and a bed in the same room where I cook. 7. And the ring I want is one of marriage still. Who knew how tricky it would be to find? 8. I think only once have I ever made love with a man who loved me in equal measure to my love for him. I'll never know if I'm right about that. 9. From kindergarten class, I walked home alone and lost some papers every day. My mother scolded me and I cried. At Halloween, it was my number drawn to win the class pumpkin. When my mother arrived, she talked to me about sacrifice, talked me into leaving the gourd behind for another child who might not have a pumpkin. At St. Patrick's Day show and tell, the rough boy, Russell, showed his 4-leaf clover, bound delicately in cellophane, and we were told the clover was magical, but grew commonly. For many springtimes yet to come, I hunted my backyard for any common and delicate squares of cellophane. Thank you. I'm going to pause there and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Paige Hill Starzinger's first poetry collection, Vestigial, I'm sorry, Vestigial, selected by Lynn Emanuel, won the Barrow Street Prize. Unshelter, chosen by Mary Jo Bang, won the Noemi chapbook contest. Her poems appear in American Poetry Review, Fence, and Volt. Her new book is Vortex Street, published by Barrow Street Press. Welcome, Paige.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here reading with Cindy and Indran. I'm going to start with this poem from Vortex Street. Excavations from the tomb of the second pharaoh, 12th century. No thanks. I don't want to take the survey. The young waxer touches me in a way I know she thinks I'm old. I recognize it because I touched my mother this way. This is me, stripped bare, a knee I don't know, a long back that's familiar, a stranger's breast. How do you settle in a body for so long, still want it to change, still it changes? Annotated legs, enlarged knuckles, skin tone muddied, some firm padding gone. I ask the guard where Middle Kingdom is, and he shows me. Coffins with mummies tipped sideways, heads lined up with blue-rimmed eyes so they can see life through the casket. Leg, lotus, snails, snakes, ankh. Necklaces so delicate, amulets strung on thin strings, lack of clasps. And they survive. The next poem I'm going to read from is called Specula, and it's a long poem, and I'm going to read the beginning and then a middle section. Specula is a medical instrument for examination. It dilates. It's also the Latin word for mirror. Specula. To the man pressing the sonogram over my ovary, saying it's completely shut down, it is still part of my body. It is alive. It is mine. I want to know, is it velvety if you hold it? Is it ghostly white? Is it fragrant? Does it hum? Magnificent glands, corrugated, grooved, furrowed. This is where my children would have sprung if you could time lapse back. Alea, meaning dice, as an aleatoric music. Mozart selected a precise sequence of notes based on throwing a handful. Beauties we are, we say, beautiful, estradiol in our vaginas, and wind-swept fires in our veins. And here's a middle section of this. What of need when you want less? When you think you want less, when the self is less, you think. Look how my bones, osteoporosis, my pelvis, endometriosis, my ribs, fractious. This is the house, my only home. I own no other. I lease one car. This is my body, the beauty, yes, I abandoned to feed on more expensive tastes. A cage to decorate became a cage to pain. This structure, this cage, if I could build a cage instead. How do you disinherit yourself? Normal faults create space when the ground cracks, but as one tectonic plate forces itself on another, this is a thrust fault. I am full of faults, natural mistakes. They lie until uncovered. This next poem references 2 or 3 articles in the New York Times, and they're violent. So I'm just giving you a warning. Hook. To hang from heels, 24 articulating vertebrae, falling into their own curves, this backbone, same for swans as sloths, dangling thread of bored young men and beautiful deer they called her, who vanished, did not respond for article headlined gang rape, routine and invisible. Is one surprised? Now reporting, is the only universal human word, not mama, as linguists believed. Especially as Carmen Tarleton emerges with a new face stitched to her scalp after her husband beat her with a baseball bat, soaked her with industrial lye squirted from a dish soap bottle. A spinous process downward and backward to the sacral pelvic girdle. Atlas and axis aligning like a bowstring. This next one has a lot of different voices, so it's hard to hear. The first one is marketing jargon from digital modules that I had to take at a cosmetic company when I was a editor. And the second one is, they're working women that were icons when I was growing up on the TV, icons. And the third, the end of the poem, it references a child, and it's a child I did not have. And if you'll see in the rest of the book that I talk to the child appears in various ways, and this is an appearance of that child. My learning path. Today, my digital learning module says, it's crucial that your presence is optimized. I can see that. My eyes are bleary. I'm baffled and blown over by learning how to pull a qualified consumer through the purchase funnel. Remember Mary Tyler Moore tossing her tam o' shanter up into the city lights lit sky at 7th and Nicollet in a double-breasted peacoat, that huge smile. An unwitting extra, just plain old Hazel Frederick, exits the department store in cat-eye glasses, forever caught between the words and the final credits. Today, the username or password for your outgoing mail server is incorrect. You are bringing content to life. But there is an issue. I mean, opportunity, time decay. Shelley Hack, remember her? Leaping out of a cream convertible Rolls Royce and striding into, was it Cafe Carlyle? Bobby Short on piano. First time a woman wore pants in a fragrance ad, 1973. I must abandon the period, once a pause, now unnecessarily harsh. Snap my chat. Thanks for joining me today as we disrupt. Today, at Celine's runway show in Paris, the designer who knows what real women want, played a soundtrack of far-off city traffic and children's voices as if they were getting dropped off at school. Need a trouser suit? A reporter asks. On every seat, a quote from artist Dan Graham. I want to show that our bodies are bound in the world, whether we like it or not. Today, I'd say we like it. They are citrus, cyclamen, tarragon, oak moss, and rose. And I will name you, my child, and you shall exist like a character in a fictive world so true that we touch. Velvet petaled, starry jasmine, climbing mossy stone walls at the edge of a forest of unknown parts. The wind catching tendrils, birds' feathers, dried weeds, lifting them up in circles. No script, no credits, no. And do I have time for one more? This is the last poem in the book, and it's called Landing. Landing. And about his touch, slightly salty, sun brown, pressing down into bed sheets, faint aroma of pool, nestling of green palm fronds on window, and then trying another way. Tan earlobe, blue speckled eyes, round sides and feet, the soles, relaxing finally. Sound from somewhere inside me I'm not familiar with, as if I evaporated to reappear, shorn, stepping outside myself. No, in the mirror afterward, recognizing my mother's white hair, remembering her saying how much she liked mine when it was long, and then grief like a sudden thing, or so it seemed. Stepping barefoot into a tidal bay, slipping into briny waves, thinking of what lies deeper than I will go. Basket stars extending arms like nets to catch small crustaceans. Lava crystallizing into glass as it tumbles through mesopelagic waters. Consider, from the time of Pliny until the 19th century, no one thought there was life at great depths. You say, I am melancholy, but how beautiful to think of what lies further out. If regret is part of this, so be it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paige. Indran Amirthanayagam writes poetry in English, Spanish, French, Haitian, and Portuguese. He has published 19 books, including the Paterson Prize winner, The Elephants of Reckoning. He is a 2020 Poetry Fellow from the Foundation for the Contemporary Arts and edits the Beltway Poetry Quarterly. His new book is Migrant States, published by Hanging Loose Press. Welcome, Indran.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's a real honor and a devastating honor to follow such heartbreaking poems that I've just heard. We've just heard tonight. Really a thrill to be with you, Cindy and Paige, and thank you, Karen, for bringing us together. I'll begin at the beginning of the book, though I won't read the preface, and it's a sort of a journey through these migrant states. And when we first came to America, we came to Hawaii, to Honolulu. I was a teenager. I'd come from London. I was born in Ceylon, an island, a country that no longer exists. It's now known as Sri Lanka. And we came first to London and then to the United States through the airport at Los Angeles, at LAX, on the way to Honolulu. So landing in Honolulu, so my first real geographic American experience was on the island of Oahu. And on that island, one day, a couple of years after arrival, my father took me in his car and we went to the airport to pick up a visiting poet, a famous poet. He'd been described to me as the leading poet of America. And Allen Ginsberg came down, his black beard and his harmonium, and we put a lei on him, and we sat, and he sang to us in the car as we drove back. It was really a thrill for me to be sort of in the car with my dad, who was a very fine poet, and his friend Allen Ginsberg, who was such a well-known figure. And then we get to the house, and the phone rings. Allen stayed with us that week, and I pick up the phone. And can you imagine, it's Bob Dylan calling for Allen Ginsberg. So I had this thrill of bringing the phone over to Allen and saying, Bob Dylan is calling for you. So the messenger between those two, they were working on Rolling Thunder Review at the time. So mind breathing. I have missed mind breaths left by accident at a bus stop in Waialae, Kahala in 1979. 2 years earlier, I heard Allen Ginsberg sing Father Death Blues from the manuscript. On November 17th, 1960, I breathed for the first time without maternal assistance on a cot at McCarthy Nursing Home, a few blocks from our residence in Colombo. Allen brought a harmonium as a carry-on music box on his flight to Oahu. Back then, nobody examined strings for chemical traces, death marches, laments. My most treasured documents, letters from Allen to my father, painting by Jose Luis Cuevas that graced the front cover of my first Spanish book, comment from a certain President Clinton about the tsunami in poetry, together in a file that disappeared in 2006 after our house was ransacked by unidentified human beings in search of food, drink, money, and letters written by the author of Mind Breaths. This is not a joke. I bear witness to these losses here as my own attempts to speak in breaths shall infuse a poem able still to coagulate, distill, strain a few thousand disparate disappearances into verse. Friends and readers, hypocrites, I love associating with the most damned dramatic traditions, and saints, Francis, whom I embraced at confirmation, and many other inspiring staffs for each day and hour of our persistent walking ahead, in spite of inclement accidents, robberies, forgetfulness. Come and drink. Now, thank you. I so enjoyed that book, Mind Breaths. In that book, Allen has a poem, the song Father Death Blues, and I literally lost it on that bus stop back in 1979. Walt Whitman shows up in this book. His 200th birthday was last year, and or in many places there were celebrations, and in Washington, where I live in Rockville, just outside of Washington, we organized about 10 days of readings and events and seminars, and Kim Roberts, who is reading for you next week, was key to organizing those events, and she was the former editor of Beltway Poetry Quarterly as well. So it's a very family business and a personal business, poetry. Everybody's linked to each other. Anyway, Walt Whitman, I got to participate in a couple of those events, and then I started writing poems in dialogue with Whitman, and they ended up being strung through this book, The Migrant States. So I'll read a couple of those. Walt 200, written on his birthday, on that 200th birthday. Break the locks, unleash the mind, Walt Whitman has left Paumanok. He is abroad. He is sitting among us in our soul. He flies the post with pigeons and the giant freight planes. He hops freight trains and rides into Mexico. He's on a P&O cruise visiting St. Kitts and Barbados. He has joined the Merchant Marine. He sails into Guantanamo. He throws fish into the sea in search of whales. He has the biggest, longest beard in the world. He jives, thrives, cavorts, shimmers. He's 200 years old today, and he does not give a flying rat. He's in your mind, Mr. President, even if you cannot smother or scratch or squeeze him out. He is gloriously spirit, gadfly, rabbit, and sloth. He nurses our democratic wounds. He knows how to write history from the pebble's view, the side glance of the wren, the snake hanging in the tree. He is black and white and all shades of gray. He is our friend and guide, and he will elect us every time we fall down. Let us go back to Paumanok with what we've learned these 200 years. Let us go back to set forth again, Walt Whitman in our backpack. You know, the notion of setting forth again, we just edited the Beltway Poetry Quarterly, and we called the issue "The Dream Returned." I mean, we have a sense, I think, now in America that the dream is back, that we can dream it again, and we can also go back to Langston Hughes's poem, "The Dream Deferred," and see, you know, where we can now move it forward. And so it's a happy time, despite the tragedy of the pandemic that we're living through now. And so these poems, even though they were written before, they speak to me in this time, you know, and they're of this time. One of the things, at least in some poems we do, is we look back and we remember and we memorialize. Poems, I always say, are good not only for funerals and commemorations. I think they can make things happen, despite what Horton said, that, you know, that poetry makes nothing happen. So one of the simple sort of nostalgic poems in this book is called Prelude, going back to the Manhattan and the New York life that I used to live and knew. To live on the island satisfied basic needs, poetry readings in the evenings, noodled curries, belly dancing and love and gardens, famous writers on street corners, monuments, chestnuts, ice and hibiscus, movies filmed in the fruit market, and paintings in grand salons, and love, and smacking bites of a burger with a pint, the jeweled eye of a fish, a tailor who survived, the number branded on his arm, the delight of lingering over a glass of wine, the chat in love, sunrise and sunset over two splendid rivers. Thank you. I will read now another poem. I think poetry also is a kind of written against melancholy, or even though it's born in melancholy, and Sundays. This is a Sunday, but a happy Sunday. But sometimes Sundays are like this. It's called Recalling Sunday. I've fought the blues on so many Sundays. I've lost count of hours frittered away and sifting through the past to understand why I carry a peculiar strain of melancholy that pierces all activity and must in the end be endured, tempered by the mass, a story shared at evening with my daughter, a cricket game relived fondly when far removed from the pitch, and dare I say it, in company of that bitch life who does not spare even Sunday to poke a dagger into memory. I think of course, of all the people I love, and my daughter, my son among them, you know, they are doing different things. My son did the cover of this book, actually, The Migrant States, and he has done the covers of 2 or 3 of my books, including Uncivil War. And my daughter, now 14, is with her mother in in Argentina. So the pandemic has meant we can't see each other, but there's so many people have been separated by the pandemic, but we keep in touch. And let me read now two poems, thinking of them. One is called Summer Chess for Anandan. You go now, and I am sad, and the sadness will spill into late summer and autumn until we meet again when the leaves fall and chestnuts smack our memories alive. And you ask, Dad, did you always walk in Regent's Park when leaves turned red and yellow and the mornings bristled with the sun, and the sun seared yet left your skin cold? A cold sun, Dad. I feel it too. This summer that I thought would go slow has turned now into a sprinter's dash. And what's to do? Yes, write and fill days with friends and games and sums until next summer, until the next time we go to bed and know there's no morning flight, and your queen and rook are ready to trap my king. And morning mass, Halloween for Lola. Hushed tones, place of worship, early morning. A woman kneeling in the pew could not get up. The priest brought her communion. Then another parishioner called for an ambulance. The fireman, a friend of the ambulance driver, arrived in his fire truck. They worked together naturally. What to do now? Walk to the font, dip fingers in holy water, then go out to my car. Paramedics will lay her on a stretcher, pump her heart, wheel her away to the hospital. Life is coming to its end, a repeat. In my dad's case, his heart stopped while he kneeled at a pew. Nobody could revive it. He would have loved to see my daughter smiling as she guards the witch's cauldron this Halloween, sweets in hand. She loves ghoulish stories, so she approves of that poem, despite its melancholic details. Maybe she'll be a crime writer further on. I have a few minutes, I think. Let me read another of the. This book was edited by Dick Lurie, who is a poet and an editor and a founder of one of the founders of Hanging Loose Press. And Dick actually edited my two other books of mine as well, The Elephants of Reckoning and The Splintered Face, Tsunami Poems. And the book went through many evolutions, and so a book, I'm glad for the editor. So thank you, Dick. Il Miglio Fabbro, Eliot wrote about Pound, the better craftsman. So we need our editors, and thank you for that. One of the poems that in the Whitman series throughout this book, I'm not sure how, I've lost track of time. So I think I have probably time for a couple more poems. Is that right, Karen? Yeah. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll read this poem called Emotion Again, and then I'll finish with a little sort of ditty that was made into a song, actually. So this one's called Emotion Again. I ask the panel, the audience, what next? We have finished celebrating Walt Whitman's 200th birthday. Who will lead us into the next century? Do we find the driver in our own batteries, energy coursing through cells from foods we eat for body and mind? Like this delicious feast, finished now, 10 days at summer's beginning, to honor the founder of our Republic of Letters. Not the first, but the most expansive American, who stretched his imagination to encompass the continent and traveled beyond to India, to the moon, sun, and stars, into the interior constellations in a leaf of grass. Walt Whitman, we do not want the party to end. We wish to keep stroking your gray beard, reading the day's news out loud as you lay dying in Camden, bedridden, reported on almost daily by the Times. If you had drunk milk punch, broth, and twice when you seemed to have kicked the bronchial pneumonia, eaten a mutton chop. You dropped out of the news too when the paper thought you had improved enough to live without their noting every food and visitor, brother George, sister-in-law, biographer, favorite niece Jessie, and your final physician, Dr. McAllister. Your last words, a request to attendant Fritzinger, worry, shift, roll over, Walt Whitman. You told the doctor, who asked if you were in pain, no, almost inaudibly, a wisp of smoke floating out of the row house into the street, mixing with the air, falling later on as rain, in poems and songs recollected in tranquility again and again. And I'll end with this poem from the section of the book that's called that has to do with another part of America, which is Haiti. You know, I think of America as the continent, and so there are American scenes here in Colombia, in Peru, and in Haiti. And this poem, which is a song actually in Creole called Temps avocate fini, the time the avocado season is over. In English, it goes like this. The season of avocados is over. The most beautiful girl in town is about to marry a man across the water. My brother is busy with his manuscript. Time to share ideas in a book has gone to the country without a hat. Accept reality. Don't live anymore in fantasy. You are getting along in years, but have only spoken Creole for 2. You have a great long life ahead. Think, reflect, tell all the new families congratulations, good luck. Then write again about your life in Haiti when the avocado was in bloom. Thank you very much. Migrant States. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Indran. What a wonderful reading. Thank you all. And I'm very much looking forward to the conversation about these books. Cindy, I was wondering if you would throw out the first question, please.
Since we are just still in the world of Indran's poetry, I'll start with a question to you. One of the things that I appreciated the more I was reading in your book, Migrant States, is the delicacy that you have with off rhyme, slant rhyme, those partial rhymes that are really beautiful. And I wondered in a number of the poems that emerges as a very quiet kind of extra sparkle, I guess I'll say. And I wondered how do you think about the rhymes as you are working, as you are creating a poem?
Well, thank you very much. For me, rhyme is very important, but certainly coming into the line as I'm writing, you know. Now, subtly, I think of poems almost like little whispering in the ear, a kind of confidence and intimate exchange between the speaker of the poem and the reader or the listener, and rhyming and song making are very much connected. You know, I think of poetry as lyric, as a song, and dance with words, and so I think of the dance and the music and the words all being as seamlessly as possible one expression. And so I do think of the rhymes sometimes quite deliberately, but I don't try to impose the rhyme. I feel I trust in the instinctive sort of that the rhyme is born in the words, in the phrasing. And when it's there, I take it and I accept the gift. When it's not there, I'll let it be for a bit. But I think of Gerard Manley Hopkins or Dylan Thomas, one can work the poem and really find the music in the language. I think in every language we have an amazing word music. Walcott used to say, ask the question, "Donde está la música?" Where is the music? When reviewing somebody's poem and saying, well, where is the music in there? So what is, not to say that there's only one kind of poetry and that's right and there's another kind that's wrong, but rhyme is for me an important element, or off rhymes, or an alliteration and sound plays are a very important part of the mnemonic device, the remembering the poem, the reciting the poem out loud. And I think that's, and and the precision. These are lyric poems, but they're written in free verse, right? They're free, but free verse has its own compositional structures. I think that's something that that makes it different from prose as such, or a prose poem. And I definitely work in the territory of the lyric and the free verse poem, as opposed to the prose poem, or as opposed to breaking the line arbitrarily. I do believe there's a reason why I break the line where I do. And I think it's a visual experience as well as an oral experience. So that's why it's good to have the book in hand, or the poems in hand as well. It's just a richer experience, a richer encounter, because it's a visual encounter as well as an oral encounter. But tonight we're having an oral encounter, which is wonderful. And if I may, I'm sometimes a bit shy about technical aspects of poetry, because I come from a sort of mystical kind of relationship to poetry, that it speaks to you through the muse, and the muse shows up somehow, or you summon the muse like the genie on a bottle, and then you get transformed. You start literally shaking with the beat of the poem as you're writing it. I wonder if I may turn the question around and ask, because as I was listening to both your poems, maybe the precision and the sort of devastating frankness of this is a different question now, if I may move on. The devastating frankness of your utterance, in both Cindy and in Pages, that when I say devastating frankness, it's unsettling, it's revelatory, and it's incredibly heartbreakingly honest. I felt that I was being privileged to almost the raw truth, as precisely and as skillfully uttered as possible about very, very troubling and so things. So is there anything? Maybe my question is, if you've done that, then is the poem then perfect? Is there something else that can be done to the poem than reveal that truth in such a frank and disarming and troubling way, as you both do in different poems that we heard tonight? Would any of you want to think about this notion of the perfecting of the poem? Is there at some point where you have to just accept that you have done your job, and the poem is done? I'm sorry if it's not a very specific question, but I hope it'll lead to a reflection for both Paige and Cindy about and when does the poem finish? When is the poem finished?
Right. I will say I think often about the scope of my poems, or even the lack of scope sometimes. I have to challenge myself to think. Usually this happens not in the writing, but in revision a little bit. How could I layer this? Is there a piece of this poem that's not yet in place? Is there some other broader connection that this hints at that I could draw out of it? So I appreciate what you're saying, and thank you. I really loved what you had to say about rhyme and lyric poetry as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Paige, you want to take his question?
Yeah, so that complication and layering is something that I loved about Cindy's work, especially Redacted, where you have these, you're talking about miniature worlds and you're really setting them up. They're different worlds, and you're showing how they crisscross or how they impact each other. So there's a whole nother thing going on that takes it beyond the personal or beyond a specific episode. I mean, I think what Cindy's doing is creating these wonderful worlds that are overlapping that contain glitches. So I love that. There are usually glitches. You say in Redacted, the glitch writes itself eventually. And that's something that can be found in a very small moment and expanded out to really huge moments, as we've been seeing with the insurrection and everything. I mean, that's a wonderful way of looking at a personal moment, and especially if you layer, showing how it bursts out into something else. And I don't want to say bigger, because I think going deeper into personal is often something that in itself opens up worlds and touches people and allows you to understand things that, most of us might try to deny or not talk about, or talk about only in a certain way that seems appropriate. And of course, that appropriateness is very limiting, right? Especially for women. And, what's appropriate for us to talk about and say is something that has been extremely limiting, extremely, makes one invisible, and is, rather infuriating. So I think certainly I am trying to work against that. So it's not just hopefully a personal moment, but it's about working against the construct, the context that's telling me I should only be seen it a certain way or not seen it at all, right? And then how that magnifies. Some of my poems, which are hard to read, have those layers, like your Redacted, that get political. I mean, that go from Syria to, New York to wherever, and you see the explosion of the lack of attention and care and listening that we have that operates on different levels, or at least I hope that's what it's doing.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I was gonna leap from that, and I think this is part of that in your work, how observing your work on the page in your books, you have a freedom with the white space and placement of lines. And Indran was saying a moment ago how much care he gives to where a line stops and breaks. And I would say that's even amplified further in your work, because you're also moving around in the space of the page. And I was intrigued with how that would convey in an oral presentation of your work. And because there are two different experiences of your poem. Would you say more about that?
Yeah, it's difficult. I try. It's difficult because they're really written for the page. I mean, they're in my head. I'm saying them, so there is an oralness to them, but they're written for that page, and they're sort of felt down the page. And I mean, like Indran, I assume you're, the migrant states that are moving past boundaries, beyond boundaries, not letting those boundaries, limit you, that I felt in your lines that there was this freedom of movement and a sense of equality. I thought I was going to ask you about this, because you often have either a big block, everything's equal, that says that so clearly. Nothing, I'm not going to make one thing better than another or start or finish with something. It's equality of everything there. Or, you go from couplets to couplet to couplet or triplets, and they're usually regular. So nothing pops out. Mine operate differently, but for different reasons.
Fascinating what you say about everything, this conversation about when you mentioned about borders and crossing borders. That's of course, yes, a very important thing to me. It has just been both in the details of my autobiography, but also in what I write about, and crossing borders also between languages, and personally because I write in these other different languages, and write in them and try to write in them as much as I write in English. But when you talked about the prohibited and what the appropriate, I just love that. I mean, I'm just, you've opened up, both of you, worlds of exploration. And in terms of autobiography, the poem is autobiographical, fascinates me, because I mean, in a sense, the I is an important element, at least in my poetry. But I mean, it's the autobiography, but the mirror is convex or concave or distorted, or it's like the surreal mirror, or the cubist mirror or something. It might focus on some aspect, and the rest of it is diffuse, but it's all about trying to get at truth, right, and get it as detailed and as honestly as possible. 108 years old today, and not one perfect poem written. That's a Robert Lack's high vertical poem. So that the Yeats wrote towards the end, what then? All of this, and then what then? What then? This constant search to perfect and to reveal, and yet you have revealed for me in this evening, and in reading your poems, these truths that must be spoken. So in a sense, these are equalizing and democratic truths. So Whitman, though he was a poet of his time, speaks to our time and to this political struggles that you are engaging in your poetry. So I celebrate that and unite with that, and just want to do more of it myself, as I look into my own organs, so to speak, and what they offer, and what they still offer, and what they have offered, over time. I'm fascinated by the subject matter and the explorations you have, and I have done in these books, in these poems, and there is no subject that is more honor. I mean, you've taken on these subjects, aging and memory and loss and motherhood and the loss of motherhood. I mean, in the sense of the child that's not there, or the child that did not come, or the child that is expected. It's fascinating, great work. And I work out of the lyric, I work out of the musical speech, and then I move from there, So in a sense, my models are also singers like Dylan and Leonard Cohen and so on. But you can only move to the other side. You want to keep proving, testing, and crossing borders until you have to leave the work to someone else, So I think that's intellectually we need to challenge ourselves. And I think that's what I'm hearing tonight, a challenge to cross yet another border, at least in my own work. I take it very personally. I'm listening to your poems, and I want to explore further my own personas and the personas that I've acquired through reading and experiences living in different parts. And I do have a political agenda, which is can be explained on different levels. I think we all do, if I may dare to say, have this, and it's not a bad thing. It's actually a positive thing. It doesn't take away from the poetry. That sense, I feel we are part of a community of poets who do not fear, the political poem, or we are redefining it and making it more intimate and personal, and politics became very, very personal in our experiences in these last few years, and continues to be. I mean, so personal that you have people who die as a result of the politics in your families and in your community, people who lose their jobs. We are going through this national and international depression in a sense, right? At the same time that there is wealth being created, there is this terrible, devastating 410 or 20,000 dead in America, in the United States alone, from COVID, just as one devastating chink in the American promise or the dream or the sustainable dream. So I think of climate change also. I don't think we talked about it directly, but it's just it's the human climate and the human possibility, I think, is expanded through these poets. So I celebrate your work and look forward to reading more of it, and invite you as well, if I may, to engage with others who are not poets, engage with the media, get people interested in the poetic interpretation, the poet making news. I do really believe passionately in that. I find it in other countries. I write, for example, a poem as a column in a Dominican newspaper in Spanish. Why do I do that? Because I like to write in Spanish, but I also think that poetry doesn't belong only to poetry audiences. In other words, we should try to move the envelope. And that's another reason to talk also about the inauguration that just happened and the poem that was read there by Amanda Gorman, and what that could do for broadening the audiences for poetry and the place of poetry in American life. So, okay, I'm sorry, I'm going on about lots of things here. I'll stop there for a minute, but if you want to talk about that, do we have time are we running out of time?
We are. I'm so sorry that we are out of time.
Sorry.
I want to thank you all so much. You've given us a lot to think about, and thank you to those who are joining us. And I encourage you to buy these very fine books. So good evening. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank